Yeah, I think that it's a bit in a different direction, but I think it could correlate to some degree. We've kind of like we've touched on, training people to sprint, training people to sprint for sport. But, in talking about football, I think for anybody listening, they see the 40-yard dash being tested. They see football players sprint and try and achieve max velocities, attempt to at least. And there's a correlation there. With my experience working with baseball, I think, we have this like 60-yard dash and these kind of qualities that people focus on. But, do you see a carryover? At least, I feel to some degree there is a carryover to getting an athlete to produce greater max velocities almost in a global way. You know what I mean? Like the ability to produce a max velocity could have a global impact on other things. A pitcher's ability to run faster or sprint even with better mechanics, control their center of mass through, I don't want to call it gait cycle because pitching is inevitably not going to move perpetually forever, but having a pitcher, especially sometimes pitchers that we see that are taller. Justin Verlander is a great example of this. Somebody who's longer limbed, who is taller, who some people might associate with kind of jumping down the mound. That person being able at higher velocities to manage their center of mass. You see a global carryover to just making all athletes faster.
Oh, absolutely. I think just like we talked about before, where you're pushing them in the weight room so that stimulus carries over. I think it works the other way too, and especially for pitchers where their upper bodies are overtaxed to begin with. So let's look at their lower body, the tax, the nervous system, and in ways that's not going to create overuse injuries in the upper body, right? So, and I saw that, like, there was one time I had to work with. He was with the Mets at the time, tall pitcher. His name was Thor. I
Yeah.
can't remember, but he was a big guy, right? And he was I think he did some weightlifting and stuff like that, and he had some injuries in the upper body, like lat tear and all that. And so getting him to do just upright sprinting on the curved treadmill was interesting because you could tell he had the power. It's just nobody had really directed him to vent it that way, right? And perhaps that was a good thing for him. And so even with the Braves, I've been talking, their strength coach is Brad Scott. He's a really smart guy. And so when I said, okay, I'm doing these 10 by 10 repeats, he started to introduce them with the pitchers. And they really liked it because it was a way for them to express velocity in a way that didn't, detract from their upper body, resiliency and capacity. So I think there's certainly a way to tap into that sprint tool or that sprint mechanism that will feed back into other areas. And everybody that I've worked with who's done, say, like hamstring rehab, we do just a short sprint approach to hamstring rehab. And everybody goes like, well, I want to do, am I going to get weaker in the gym? It's like, no, just keep doing this. And we'll do it for 2 to 3 weeks. They go back to the gym and their lifts are all as good or better than they used to be. Right. I'm not saying just sprint and don't lift. I'm saying, like, sometimes if you go away from something and hit it a different way and you come back to it, you'll have a super compensation effect. So I think there's creative ways. People who are intelligent understand how to take something like sprinting to kind of create a super maximal stimulus that feeds back into powerlifting, or like Pat Davidson was doing the sprinting as part of his bodybuilding prep, right? And we talked about that. I talked to him Saturday about that, and he wants to keep doing it. And like I'm just like, yeah, okay, that's not my area, right? But he seems to think it helped him, right? So I like it when people start doing stuff like that and taking sprinting and using it in an intelligent way that maybe other people have overlooked.
Yeah, Noah Syndergaard is the Mets pitcher, or was formerly on the Mets.
Yeah, him, right?
Yeah,
It was funny because I'm
big,
like, hey, okay, what sports did you do when you were young? He's like, baseball. I'm like, okay, that's all you've done, okay.
He's a huge fan of powerlifting. He's a big Jailhouse Strong fan, Noah Syndergaard.
Okay.
Huge fan of,
he
like,
was a big dude, yeah.
Yeah, bench press, safety bar squat. I'm a big fan of Syndergaard. And he was a great example that you brought that up. Two things I had done this year is I've worked with a lot of pitching staff, and some kickers in the NFL. And one big thing I introduced with some of them was bounding, was marching, skips, and bounding. And it wasn't even max or sub-maximal sprinting from the point of view of deceleration, center of mass control, and the ability to develop cadence. Working with bigger athletes, and I think Syndergaard's a great example of this. Either taller athletes, bigger, stronger athletes, is as they move through sports, as they move through space, but not through, say, gait cycle, but through, an established gait, there's a necessity to decelerate, but decelerate with a level of, control and directionality. And I think that's something that, in sprinting, and especially what you said, conventional, just like old school marches, skips, and bounds, is you really develop that proprioceptive ability to take in a constantly varying environment and then manage not only for the force you're producing, but the force you're absorbing. And that's something, I saw, and I was excited to ask you about, because, I saw in an anecdotal sense with a lot of people that exist outside of speed sports, but still exist, trying to create max velocity, is this ability to, I separate exercises from everything being exercise to things being drills and things being exercises. And I think drills progress in complexity. And that's something I think that's more unique or akin to the track and field world than, say, the weightlifting world, where we get in the gym and everything is an exercise. We're forced to make it heavier, do it longer, or change it altogether. Whereas in track and field, and my brief experience with it myself, it's I feel an understanding that things will become more complex, and then they'll almost self-intensify based on the athlete. Someone who runs faster will require speed endurance because they're already running at a velocity in which endurance is now a necessity. If you run slow, you never have to worry about running that far. Try running faster first, right? That was at least what was told to me in a very tongue-in-cheek way. Don't worry about speed endurance. You're not moving fast anyway. But I think that's so interesting, is pulling, complexity, I think, from track and field and Charlie Francis back in the day, I think, into the world of strength and conditioning, at least now, where I think it got a little bit lost, just because, in a good way, we drove towards, making athletes stronger, but then maybe adopting too many weight room conventions.
I agree.
I wanted to get your opinion on, because we talk, obviously it's really hard to talk about sprinting for 50 minutes and not circle around the idea of injuries, which, we're always trying to toe the line of volume intensity whilst driving stimulus, but including enough variability with the sole purpose of making them better without getting hurt, right? And anyone who's worked at a high level accepts a certain amount of risk for the reward of being a long-term career full of wisdom as we lower you into the ground, as you so affectionately coined it earlier in the podcast. What do you look at now? Like, you want to talk things in vogue, sure, bands and exercises, and we can do a podcast on all of the ways that we need to keep athletes' attention with movements in the gym. To an equal or maybe greater sense, the recovery side of strength and conditioning, but more specifically sprinting, how do you manage the inundation of recovery really as a subset of training now? Are there modalities you lean into more specifically with the sprinting? Are there practices, or what are the big rocks for you when you look at recovery from driving this specific stimulus and adaptation?
Yeah, I really still stick with that concept that Charlie Francis came up with around like identifying and managing high intensity activities versus low intensity. And like I use the example of walking the dog, but even myself, it kind of escapes me sometimes how important that low intensity work is. And it could be like circuits in the gym, it could be med ball passes, it could be, running intervals on the grass or on the treadmill. But I think every case that I've come across lately has been people are lacking that low intensity foundation. And so ultra specificity has been the kind of thing that people are going after. And, whether it's early specialization in youth sports where we see more injuries now, or it's just people thinking like, I just got to keep throwing or sprinting or, to get better. And they see that immediate effect, but in the long term, they end up suffering. So I think for me, is there that balance between how much high intensity mileage or running I'm doing and how much low intensity? And, and it might be quite easy. I think people are overdoing the low intensity and probably going too fast. Like I think Charlie's quote was, they're doing their fast is too slow and their slow is too fast, right? So I think you're trying to have this polarized approach where the low intensity is feeding the high intensity through regenerative processes and circulation. And that's really, I think, if you, Charlie Francis always said, if you have a great circulatory system, it takes care of a lot of problems. But if your circulatory system is compromised, you're going to have, problems with like feeding the tissues for regeneration and clearing out stuff that's bad, all the waste products, right? So all of the other things he went back to would be like hot, cold, contrast work to drive that cycle, massage. Like he was a big proponent of regular massage, not just to flush things out, but also to check. Like he said, if I went over an athlete's legs, I could tell you what was going on. Like, what maybe they were overusing the posterior chain, the hamstrings were, the tone was high, or the calves, maybe there was just too many foot contacts. So he was really intelligent with the way he monitored and then dispensed things. And the thing that I found out, through just being around him, was he didn't do a lot of long-term planning, at least detailed, because things were changing every day and every week. And so he was a little more adept at managing the training because he knew what he did on Monday, and that would influence what he did on Wednesday on the high intensity side. Because if they did something, say they had a personal best on the Monday, well, he would downgrade the Wednesday because he's like, well, what am I going to keep doing? Is just keep feeding him the same uh, workout material and let him blow up, or would I downgrade it a bit and then bring him back up, knowing that he had to recover from that personal best or whatever? So he was much more flexible. Like there was an awareness and a flexibility where he's like, yeah, okay, that's good. We accomplished what we accomplished. Let's just move on. And if somebody missed a workout, he wasn't trying to make it up. So it was a very dynamic approach to just working with what was in front of him and not thinking like, I got this in 4 weeks, or this happened, you know, 10 weeks ago. He's always in the moment trying to make decisions. So I think from a recovery point of view, I don't think people do that. I think they're very generic in their approach. Like, oh, let's slap on some Normatec sleeves and give you a protein shake. But okay, well, but is that addressing what your need is? Maybe it isn't. Maybe you need more in low intensity work so that you can self manage the circulation, and we don't need to buy these Normatec sleeves. And we'll never get a promo from them now, but certainly, I think you're always looking for the easiest path to address some of these issues. And then if you need to bring somebody in like a soft tissue specialist like yourself, and like I want you to look at their muscles at this very specific level and see what the tendon, myotendon junction, what's happening there, because there's, save it for that. So I think that's what's happening right now, is everybody's becoming very generic and mechanical in their approach and not as reactive as they need to be, or proactive reactive, I guess.